All right, welcome back to another episode of Just Stories with BT. We are in season 2, which is focusing on female executives, and I could not be more happy to have this week's guest, Michaela Guzy, which I just learned how to pronounce, who is the founder and runs Oh, the People You Meet. Welcome to the show.
Thank you so much. It's such an honor.
So for anyone listening on the podcast, you wouldn't see this, but if you're watching the video, you will notice that I am sitting, in an office, whereas Michaela is not. Tell everybody, where are you? Why is the background look so amazing?
I am guest hosting my friend Jimmy and Abby's hotel in Tulum, Mexico, and it's called Casa de las Olas. And it's a beautiful LEED certified kind of beach house, guest house property on the sandy beaches of Tulum Beach Road. So no complaints over here.
Absolutely. I'm extremely jealous. I actually finally just started traveling again like a month ago. And so each week I've traveled somewhere like Georgetown, Seattle, the Bay Area, and it felt so good to just get back out and start traveling for work again. But I'm yet to do something exciting, like just for vacation. So I can't wait to get out of Dodge. Cannot wait.
Well, one of the shows I launched during COVID was called Sleeping Around Again Safely. And I didn't quite make it as long as you. September, I was just like, I gotta move. It has to happen. It has to happen right now. And I started Sleeping Around Again Safely, which my mother was horrified by the title, but it's not quite as scandalous as you think. It's about documenting the world reopening safely. And so in the fourth quarter, I focused mostly on domestic, but starting in January, I started going international, and I just really haven't gone back yet. So
hey, more power to you. So before we get going into the podcast, I want to give people obviously a chance to get to know you a little bit. And I'll give you a chance to kind of just talk about the people you meet and the 3 different shows in a second, but I'm going to introduce you for you. And the reason I do this is because what I found out in listening to a lot of podcasts is that the host often will be like, hey, well, tell the audience about yourself. And then that's a very broad question. And so sometimes people go on for 20 minutes and you can tell the host is squirming in their chair, okay, stop. And then sometimes people say 4 things. So I'm going to introduce you for you. And then afterwards, you can tell me how I blew it or what I missed. Sound good?
Okay. Perfect.
Awesome. Okay, world. This is Michaela Guzy. All right. So she was born in St. Louis, Missouri, grew up there, Midwest girl. At 4 years old, she told her aunt she was obviously prophesizing in the future that she was going to move to New York City, which came true. She grew up, has 3 younger siblings, Meredith, Mara, and Maeve. And her parents are Michael and Maureen, which you can get it. And then now we have obviously Michaela. So you've got all the M's, which I'm sure was really confusing. Funny story. My dad is in the same boat. So my dad is Terry, and it's Terry, Tom, Trent, Tim, and Todd. And my grandpa was Thomas. So same deal. So growing up, she was really into singing and dancing and acting and active at school. She was an artist, and with 3 younger sisters, obviously did tons of babysitting, which is really cool. But school was very important, wanted to get a good education and get a scholarship, which she did. And she left and went to Spring Hill College, which is in Mobile, Alabama. I'm sure we all knew that. Never heard of it.
Never heard of it.
And but then she fulfilled her 4-year-old destiny, which was after that she moved to New York City, took a job working for Dutch advertising. Deutsch advertising that parlayed into a career in the travel publication world. And as she was progressing through different companies and growing in her career, she realized that there was not a very good digital solution for what was happening to the travel publication world. Obviously, the internet was blowing up. That's where everything was moving. Where she wasn't working, or at least she didn't see it. So she decides to start her own company in 2012. Oh, the People You Meet, which now blew up all over the place. She has 3 shows, wildly popular. You can see her all over TV, news channels, everywhere. And then obviously this is shows dedicated around travel. So pandemic hits, what do you do? And she actually created a new show, or 2 shows, which she'll tell us about. But one was Inspiration Station, which now has 102 streaming episodes on IGTV with 4.2 million views already, probably even more now.
I was going to say, it's actually grown. We've had 117 episodes and over 6 million
117.
at this point. Yeah.
Either way, amazing. And so these are inspirational stories that obviously during a pandemic, people need hope. They needed to hear good stories and good things. So that's probably why it caught so much traction. Plus, obviously, you're a great producer. And then now here you are on Just Stories with BT, live from Tulum.
Well, thank you so much for having me. And thank you for the Cliff Notes version, I guess. But yeah, no, it was really fun. I started Deutsche Advertising, and I find things come full circle, and those are kind of like signs to me that I'm on the right path, right? So to take it from Deutsche, my first job in advertising, my chief marketing officer there, Peter Gardner, and I like lost touch over the years where I went into publishing and I worked at Condé Nast and Hearst and some of the really major publishing brands. And yeah, the digital, social, and video solutions, we didn't have one. My Comset didn't have one, nor the company that was about to acquire us. And also none of the brands that I worked for spoke to why I like to travel, which is meeting new people. So those were kind of like my business and editorial reasons for leaving and starting with the people you meet back in 2012. And yeah, we have a show called Michaela's Map. And while we always have focused on people, places, and purposes, and so Michaela's Map was always me as a curator and going to find the local hosts to tell their own story. And on Michaela's Map, we've had, I mean, guests ranging from the president of Rwanda to fashion designer in Sierra Leone to a marine biologist who's also a scuba instructor in Los Cabos, and everyone in between. And I really like to help people tell their own stories. And so Michaela's Map and other people you meet and all our social channels are just different ways and different platforms that we've built to help share those inspiring stories. Because of COVID, we are about to roll out this whole season of shows that me and my team have worked literally for years to create and to capture. And we had this whole season and COVID hit, and I was like, okay, now is not the right time to release a show about travel and human connection. So I'm going to rein that back in. But in the very weirdest of ways, I always like to see a positive or the silver linings and things. And in the very weirdest of ways, I pulled back releasing season 1 of our long form show, Michaela's Map. And we're about to roll it out sometime in the next, hopefully, month or two. And we're in talks with places like Qatar Airlines to roll them out in flight. So in a strange way, now all of a sudden, what we were doing before the pandemic, human connection and travel, all of a sudden all these light bulbs are going off with like distribution houses and airlines. They're like, oh, travel and human connection, we all need that right now. We all want that right now. Oh, and you already have a fully produced show for around the world. And I'm like, yeah, isn't that crazy? But going to the second show, Inspiration Station, so there's no way you would have known this unless you were like obsessed with counting our viewership, but which I would find strange. We just published our 117th episode, and we have had over 6 million views on just IGTV alone, and just on that show. And I mean, as an entrepreneur, these are the things that I have to get excited about. And with Inspiration Station, what's great is I got to do things like totally differently. I got to interview people outside of the traditional travel space, and interview DJ D Nice. He's been featured in the New York Times, and like Oprah and the Obamas tune into him. And I just had Mark Groves, who I'm totally obsessed with on a personal front, not really, like not in a creepy way. And then a third show that we created, which is also like very relevant of the here and now, was back in September. I finally just had the moment where I was like, I gotta fly, I gotta move. I have like, it is my duty. I'm feeling called. I'm gonna do it as safely as possible, but I need to, given what I do as a living, I need to show people that it is safe to get out there, and I need to help the travel industry rebound. And so that was when I started the show Sleeping Around Again Safely back in September 2020. And I've literally been on the road ever since. I took a pit stop to spend Christmas with my family, but I've been to Panama and Kenya and Utah and up and down the coast of California. I've been to Miami, and I think I've spent like 2.5 months plus now, and I'm going to have a whole nother month in the Yucatan Peninsula of Mexico, everywhere from the Mexican Caribbean and the island of Holbox up to the colonial town of Merida and Valladolid, which I'm probably still mispronouncing, but I'm trying. And it's such a magical and special place. But basically, I've been outdoors since September, and it's been really fabulous and very therapeutic. And just to do a Larry David full circle, since my career started at Deutsche Advertising, and my chief marketing officer, and so I was like, oh, he like remembers who I am. That's nice. So, a lot of time has passed. And so I was flattered. And we ended up like having a chat, and it was like a nice to catch up chat. And then I sent him a few things and was just like, I always value feedback. As an entrepreneur, I don't often get someone that takes time to spend time to get to know me and my company and like what I'm doing. And he's a tough guy, but like most of the time when I feel like he's confused about something that I'm saying, which is so crystal clear to me, obviously, because I created it, I'm like, oh, well, then there's probably other people on the outside that are confused by XYZ. And so just like everything from like our presentations to, my positioning statement, whatever, like I'll go back and I'll look at it. I mean, pretty awesome to have someone that I used to work for, but they used to like work in branding and advertising and like at major ad firms to give me feedback. So I'm like, sometimes I translate what I need from those messages, but he ended up becoming the first investor in my company late last year. So it's
That's awesome.
Yeah. So yeah, it's been a wild, insane ride. And
Yeah,
I have to say, in terms of Inspiration Station, it's been great because that truly kept me inspired during the dark and early days of COVID when nobody knew what was going on.
Yeah, absolutely. And I love, that part of the story is reconnecting with someone from a previous career, and then they end up becoming this really big part of the future, because I think that it's actually a really strong message and something that I preach all the time, not just to my employees, but I actually talk to my kids about it all the time, which is like both my kids we were driving somewhere a couple weeks ago, and someone I used to work with a long time ago called, and I always take my work calls. If the kids are in the car, I let them listen, because I just think they can learn a lot from it, and and it was interesting because after the call I said, hey, like, what were your takeaways? And this is like a full business thing. This guy was trying to start this business, and they were kind of telling me, and I just said, listen, at the end of the day, I said, schooling's important, your work ethic's important, all these different things that you do help mold your career. I said, but for me, at least in my experiences, my relationships have been the thing that took me everywhere. It's always been the people that I met, the relationships I built, how I treated people, how they treated me. And I said, you're going to learn this phrase in school a lot, where people say, hey, it's, treat others this way, how you want to be treated. And that's great. And you want to make all these connections. I said, and that's fine. But I said, the reality is you want to make connections so strong that person would do you a solid, just like you would do them. I go, that's what matters. And I look just like you, like where I'm at now in my career is because I work with a guy that I worked with a decade ago, and years he kept saying, oh, I've got this thing. I got this cool company. I got this thing, and he kept just trying to get me. And eventually, like, he got me, but solely because we had that relationship. And I always am baffled, especially on a platform like LinkedIn. Anytime I see someone say something negative about someone else or somewhere they worked or whatever, I'm always like, what are you doing? Like, it makes no sense to me, because you're like, why would you close any door ever? Because you just have no idea.
Yeah. I'm 9 years into running my own company, and everyone needs assistance and help and support. And like, nobody can really afford, I think, to have like the negative attention, especially when you're small or getting started or pivoting or whatever the case may be. But I don't know, like some of definitely my corporate career wasn't easy. And by the way, neither has been my owning my own company. So I need all the love and support I can get. And sometimes love and support comes from some of the strangest places. And like, you
Oh, yeah.
don't realize on social media, like who's watching, you don't know who's watching. And so I didn't know that my former chief marketing officer from my first job in 2001 was like watching my journey. I had no idea. And I also like, I had some icky stuff around especially my last job. I was a young female executive, very young VP at American Express Publishing, and um, I my team, like my New York team, were men that were older than me, and I was working with independent contractors all over the world. And funny enough, the independent contractors were massively supportive of me, as were my external clients. And then, I'm actually referring back to like an old, what do they call it? There's so many freaking reports that we had to do in corporate America. I know they have their place, but I don't miss them at all. But it was a 360 review. And so where I excelled in my 360 review was like the very top people, like really liked and admired and respected me. And I think they saw me as like, this go-getter, do-gooder, whatever. And then the like very junior people, I think, thought me very inspiring and like looked up to me and whatnot. And my external clients, and then like partners and ICs and stuff. But it was usually the people right around me, like in my circle. And I now with space and time, I think was probably they were threatened by me.
Mhm.
Um, I was like, I'm really nice. Like I'm this nice Midwestern person. And I mean, part of that comes with like good leadership, like meaning my leadership was not strong. And it I mean, it could have been better on so many levels, but when you have a good leader, like your leader works with you, they ask you hard questions, they have hard conversations with you, they stand by you, and or you shouldn't be in that position, right? They shouldn't have put you in that position in the first place. So I definitely didn't have that. And that's something now, like I work with almost all ICs and like all over the world. So I took that learning. I was like, okay, well, where were my strengths in that 360 report? And that was my external clients, which by the way, I still have not only all of them, but like more of them. And now like clients not only like hire me to create content, but those same clients will like have me come give an inspiring talk to their colleagues as we emerge out of the pandemic. Or even like before the pandemic, I was doing trend predictions and forecasting for them. So it's such an honor to like be very valued and trusted in that regard. Like that to me is like one of the highest compliments that I could in fact receive.
Yeah.
And my model now for in terms of like the people that work with me has been independent contractor. And that was for a number of reasons. One was they were my favorite people to work with because I didn't have to get involved necessarily in all the HR and the politics of things. But also I knew I was like, I like being my own little boss and my own little business, and all of my international offices were set up that way. They were their own boss in business, but they would come to me and they'd be like, okay, here's the situation. I need you to come into market. We're going to do these things. We're going to have these meetings. Like, because they were incentivized to bring in the business and only paid on that business. And so I always found that people owning their own business, if you will, and like kind of managing their own timetables and schedules, like it boils down to trust and independence. And I've been a digital nomad and like a believer in that, even from my days at Amex, because I was on the road like 3 weeks a month. And so
Yeah.
that really is how I've focused my team structure out of the people you meet over the past 9 years.
Nice. And so tell me, because I want to get into how you created these two shows during the pandemic, especially. But before that, just I always ask for a few stories, and one of them is always like, you know, during the last, it could be any time during your career, but are there any stories you can think of that every time you think about it, it just makes you laugh?
When I was in corporate America and I was traveling with the editor-in-chief of this very prestigious magazine, like she literally was like travel royalty. Like, I kid you not, people like rolled out red carpets when she like checked into hotels. And so she and I had been on the road for quite a long time. We had gone to a huge conference in London, and I feel like we popped for meetings in Paris. And I think we were well into week 2, and we were at a conference in Morocco. And while all of that is overstimulating and like managing the calendar, I had teams of people at the show, and then at this show it was just like me and her, and everybody wants to talk to her. Like they will all want to be featured by her or whatever. And she was a little bit high maintenance, if I was to be very blunt. But she like worked her ass off. And I mean, it's not my style, but like, yeah, she was badass. So whatever, that was her style, and she
Totally.
liked all like the fanfare and the attention. But as the person that was traveling with her and like trying to navigate all the appointments and stuff, I was like, oh my God, this is so unbelievably stressful. And like actually a guy that used to work for me at the company was like, can Sherpa Michaela talk right now? And I was like, shut up, that's actually not funny. But it was very funny because it was kind of true. I was like, I am the highest paid Sherpa ever. And so anyway, we're in Morocco and it has been exhausting. And I really do admire this person, but also it stressed me out, right? Like she's super senior. I'm here. I'm trying to look good. Like I haven't had a day off in like weeks, like blah, blah, blah. And so anyway, I'm so honored when she comes to me and she is like, I booked this ticket treatment at this very fancy Riyadh hotel in Morocco. And I made you an appointment. And I was like, oh my God, like one, she like likes me. And like two, so I'm honored like in a business sense, but also I'm like, oh, this can be so like awesome and like so relaxing and so luxurious and all the things.
Mm-hmm.
And so I like tell all my travel friends at this conference that I'm going. They're all like, oh my God, that's so amazing. I'm like, I know, I'm so excited. And so anyway, we get to the Riyadh and get taken back into this like super posh spa. And they take me to a little dressing room and they're like, okay, they're kind of speaking French and Arabic, and it's this, I speak neither except for like oui, what, I have no idea what's going on.
Yeah.
And they're basically telling me to, strip down to nothing and like put on a robe. Okay. So they leave and I open my little locker and there's no robe. And all that's there is this like little mini towel. And I'm like, oh God, like, what am I going to do? And also I'm in an Arabic country, right? So I'm like, okay. So I'm like standing there with like the little towel over me and a very like, I've always been self-conscious and like most certainly back then and like Midwestern. So like a little bit like conservative and like grew up Catholic. And I was just like, oh my God. And I'm like literally like hiding behind the curtain and like looking out, trying to get someone's attention. And finally the guy comes back and like whips open the curtain. I'm like, oh, and I'm like, oh my God, like an Arabic man. And I'm standing here like, make this towel is not doing enough here.
Yeah.
So he just like kind of like hits me on the arm and I'm like, okay. And so I'm like following him to where I think is like a towel or a robe.
Yeah.
And the next thing I know, he's like, brings me into this like dark room. It's all tiled. There's like one little window with like a little gate on it, like with like one little beam of sun coming, and there's like a shower faucet and a bucket. And I'm like, what's going on? And he just closes the door and leaves. And I'm like, oh, okay. what's happening right now? And so flash forward, he comes back in and he is with my editor in chief, who was given a full size towel. So now I'm like, oh my God. So anybody that's ever worked as an executive or in a corporation can be like, oh my God, this situation is already wrought with like so much corporate compliance, like
Yeah.
nightmares that like you can't even. So I'm sitting there like with my little thing, and the guy, like, with this also was like so different than any of my experiences in the Middle East thus far, even though this is Northern Africa, but feels very Middle Eastern. Um, he like comes in this like basically white loincloth situation. And he like motions to us, and my editor in chief pushes me forward. And I'm like, okay. And so I like go up to him, and I'm like still standing with this stupid little towel, and I'm trying to like hide my back end from her because I'm like this is, I'm mortified. I'm mortified is the only way I know how to describe it. And the guy motions to like the floor, and I'm like, okay. And the next thing I know, he is like scrubbing me down with this like bucket and sponge. My editor in chief is like sitting there, and I keep hearing her like gasping. Like at one point, he like throws a bucket of water. I mean, I'm like, oh, and like the one he like literally he did this thing where I don't even know how it happened, but he like grabbed me, and it was like imagine airplane that you do with your kids.
Yeah.
I'm naked and I'm doing airplane, but he's kicking me in the stomach. And I'm like, ah. And then he like puts me back on the ground. And the next thing I know, he's like dragging me by the ankles, like wet and naked across the tile. And at this point, my editor in chief screams and runs out of what I call left me here by myself. Like, I don't know if it's better or worse that she left me there by myself, because like it was infinitely more uncomfortable, but I'm like, what else is going to happen during this ticket treatment? And then like, I don't know, that we end up like, the guy takes me, at this point, I'm just like naked, wet and befuddled. And he ends up like shampooing my hair with like oils, and he even like squeezed an orange on top of me. And I was just like, okay, like I don't know. And he just like led me naked back to my little room, and I was like, and afterwards, so I put up this post, and now there's an article on my story, on this story on my website, Oh the People You Meet. And by the time I got back to the conference, I had sent this story as a text to a friend at the conference, and there was like some event that night. By the time I got to that event that night, it had been forwarded all around to everyone at the conference. And I was like, oh my God. And like, you know, my editor in chief is like still there, right? So like, I mean, like 900 people that night probably came up to me, and they're like, oh my God, you're the Tika girl. And I'm like, oh no, what? Oh my God, how did this get out there? And so I finally, I mean, I've literally years later been at a conference in London, and someone from India came up to me and was like, I have to tell you, like, I've always loved that story. And I was like, how do you, what? You know that story? And I'm like, oh my God. Like, so it's kind of like one of those things I'll never live down. And I'm just like, okay, whatever.
That is so awesome. I had, it's so funny because it reminds me, I was part of a crew. We shot a documentary film about the genocide that was happening inside of Burma, which flash forward, it's happening again. But this is back in the mid 2000s. And so we would go into Thailand first, and then we would sneak in and out of Burma to shoot the film. And so when we were on our way out, we had been there for 6 weeks. And so we had to fly out of Bangkok. So we were in northern Thailand. And so we spent 2 days down in Phuket before we flew out. After this like kind of hellish 6 weeks of, you know, sneaking out of the country and not eating in this whole 9 yards, we were like, let's do like just a day or two in Phuket and like relax. And so one of the guys that was with us had never been out of the country. He had never even drank. He had never had any alcohol. He had never been a very conservative kid, not like the other three that went on the trip. And so it was like our last night, and we were like, oh, we were eating at this restaurant, and this lady was walking around, and she's like, oh, best Thai massages ever, and we're like, yeah, let's get a Thai massage. And I had been to Thailand like 4 times getting ready for the film, and he had never been, and so he didn't know, like, so first of all, we follow this lady, and at first we're following her, and then all of a sudden she gets into this building, and it looks like a nice building, and then she takes us through these back stairs, and all of a sudden it's looking more shady and more shady as we go up, and we end up in this kind of, like you said, this top floor, no windows, like kind of just curtain separators, very grimy. But it's Thailand, it's Thai massage, and so
and it probably costs $7.
Oh, for all of us, $7.
Yeah.
For sure, maybe 5 for everybody. And it was funny because he's also never had a massage, so he'd never been to a massage. He didn't know, oh yeah, well, you take your clothes off, you put a towel, like whatever. So it's all curtains separating us, so you can hear anybody. And he's going, wait, what? And the lady's trying to communicate with him, but she doesn't speak English. And we're like, dude, you got to take your clothes off. But we didn't tell him that in a Thai massage like this, you kind of got to tell him, like, hey, just massage only, like you got to like say.
No.
And he doesn't know. And he's like this, like I said, most innocent dude like of all time at that point in his life. And so the massage is going on. It's like 30 minutes in. And all of a sudden I hear him going like, wait, what? Oh, hold on. No. What? And he's like freaking out. And we start dying because I know what happened, which is like, it was the time where you flip over, and obviously like she tried to whatever. And it was, he just grabbed his clothes and ran out, and we were dying.
Oh, bless him.
We laughed for so long, we were like, dude, you got to like just say, no thanks or whatever. It was, but
Yeah, but on it, if you don't know, like that could be very alarming.
Oh,
very
for sure.
alarming.
I know he was shocked for sure.
Well, I mean, the funny thing about that story, and with all things, I think travel is, it does open people's eyes, minds, and hearts, and like the people you're traveling with, you connect with, and like you remember that story all these years later. But it's just this like point of connection that you might not have otherwise had, and these experiences that you might not have otherwise had or known about. And now I get people from around the world, like still all these years later, sending me their own versions of the ticket treatment or the Thai yoga massage. So, I mean, maybe one day I'll publish short essays of people's
just a
culturally enlightened.
Just like a
yes,
coffee
exactly,
like,
exactly, right? Exactly.
So let me change gears a little bit. I love that story. Obviously, having your own company, being in the publishing world, becoming an executive, but then breaking off and doing your own thing. I'm sure you've had moments, or probably plenty of moments where you failed or you had a very difficult time. And I'd love to hear a story around something or some time in your career that was very difficult and kind of how you got through it.
Sure. Well, I mean, by the standard, dictionary definition of failure, I failed daily. I think it's about learning that it's what you do with the failure that actually, I think, truly dictates whether or not it was actually a failure or an opportunity to recreate. So I try to always think in like the positive and the affirming. It doesn't mean that I don't have like bad days, but actually most of my big failures were the opportunity to pivot into something else. And failures can come in many forms, right? So failure could be, I mean, you could look at it and be like, I was technically supposed to publish my show, Michaela's Map, in early March of 2020. Well, like the pandemic was starting to rage, and I was like, these people, like, it was going out, we were going to do this whole thing, but I inherently knew that it was not, it would be lost. It would have been lost, and it would have felt blind to what was going on in the world. It would have been insensitive. And actually, these messages are so inspiring and important, and these stories need to be told, and now they will, and they'll be distributed on bigger platforms because of the pandemic. And also, like, as a person that creates content mostly about like travel and human connection, I had to do a hard look in March, like not only overwhelmed by the news and what was going on and all the negativity and like the fear, but I had to look at like, okay, well, I can't do things the way that I used to, not now, and probably not ever truly the same way again. Like it's going to be an evolution, right?
Yep.
So I always think failure is an opportunity to learn and to grow, and likely to pivot. It's a message from wherever to tell you like here's the next thing that's coming. And so I started the pandemic with one show, and I've emerged with it with three. And the two new ones, Inspiration Station and Sleeping Around Again Safely, were just totally born out of like, what were my gifts that I could give? What were my assets, my ability to communicate, my global community that I already had, who I knew were already, everybody was struggling. Everybody needed human connection in that moment. And, May was Women's Mental Health Month. And I think all of our mental health, like, how could it not be affected by this, like, thing that you couldn't see, locking us all down and shutting down the very way that we live? And so many of us, myself included, being negatively financially impacted. And like, I also threw in a breakup and a move out, and like my whole industry was decimated.
Yeah.
And I was like, okay, well, my immediate gift is going to be to like connect people from all over the world. And I'm so lucky to know so many inspiring people. But also, like, I didn't know DJ D Nice at the beginning of the pandemic, and like I didn't know Mark Groves, but I became familiar with their work because they are people that were also giving back. My yoga studio, Moto, I've had several of my instructors on. And so the way that I formulate like who I'm going to have on the show is that they must inherently be inspiring, that they must be doing work bigger than themselves, and that can take many forms, right? So DJ D Nice started Club Quarantine in the early days of the pandemic and gave the gift of free music and community and people tuning in to live events. Mark Groves has a free podcast, which is insanely informative and awesome. And he also gives free content on relationship advice on Instagram. And it's like, I joked around with him during my interview. I was like, you kind of like have two totally different personalities. And I was like, if I had met you on Instagram instead of your podcast, I might have been a little like, whoa. But because I fell in love with your vulnerability on your podcast and the subject matter you cover, I could then tune into your Instagram and receive those messages. And he was like, oh, that's so funny. Like, I hear that all the time. And then, I mean, I just had the head of innovation for American Airlines on, and you're like, okay, well, what's inspiring about what he does? Well, he's very inspiring. He's getting the world literally moving again and safely, and he's developing like all these systems for touchless travel so that people not only feel safe but are in fact more safe by the work that he is doing to make that happen. And you can imagine it's taken millions, if not billions of dollars of research and funding to do the type of work that he is doing. So I really just try to use Inspiration Station as a platform. And like in the early days of COVID, my subject matter, I had everyone from my accountant on who was talking about how small businesses could get PPP, like what would this mean for our taxes, like giving accounting advice, which almost every single episode, like I'm asking all these questions because I'm actually truly interested in like the subject matter of what that person, like, let me
Like, wait, yeah,
all this insight and share. So yeah, like it's been nice because it allowed me to dip outside of my traditional industry of travel and dig into well-being and wellness. And I mean, just talented and awesome people that are doing amazing things. And there's so many other stories. And now as the world is reopening and reemerging, I'm having more and more of my travel folks back on,
Yeah.
that are doing great and inspiring things, not only to get people to travel, which I think is ultimately inspiring for most of us when we get out into the world.
Sure.
But people that are also like really supporting their communities or bringing back a number of jobs. And I don't think a lot of people realize like sustainable travel has always been a very big thing for us. The people you meet, and it was before the pandemic, and it most certainly is now. But part of sustainability is supporting local community. And I think we all got a little taste of local community during COVID and the small businesses that surround us. And what people don't realize is like cruise lines employ millions of people around the world. And like the travel industry is 1 in 10 jobs across the planet. And so when people weren't traveling, like New York City, like, do you know how much of that city's revenue is based on hotel tax?
Yeah.
Like, it's it's really impacting people at the very, very bottom. And oh my God, Norwegian Cruise Lines launched this series called Embark, and it's on their YouTube channel. I started crying. Um, I'm a total sucker, but for a good story. But they had, all these different people from on their ships and like sharing their experiences during COVID. And there was like this bartender, and he started crying during his interview, and he's like, "It's really my life. I can't wait to welcome travelers back
Yeah.
from around the globe." He's like, "I miss meeting them and like sharing their stories." And I'm like, "Oh my," I'm getting choked up now. But yeah, no, they're actually like really, they're real and they're beautiful. And so you can say whatever you want about cruises, but some people really like those trips. And there's a lot of people that are employed that their whole families rely on them having that job.
Oh, 100%. And I love what you said, because normally I ask for a third story on success, but you kind of did it. You talked about
Oh,
not,
sorry.
not being able to launch your show. And then obviously now that pivoted into launching 2 totally new shows. And then you're still going to get to do your third one, which is awesome. And I think the message that's so important to tell, and the reason I love that you brought that up about pivoting, is that I've seen so many amazing examples during the pandemic of successful people, entrepreneurs, business owners, individual people who have taken on something that is the first, at least in my lifetime, the first kind of worldwide thing we're all going through together. And yet you see that successful people that have a solution mindset and just focus on what's within their control have pivoted in the most amazing ways. And I've seen these stories. I have a colleague who runs these amazing sushi restaurants, and he teaches sushiology 101. So every week he has these classes at night, and packed. It's always sold out for so far in advance because it's super fun. It's competition style, so you learn how to do rolls, and then you're competing against other people. And you charge for it, and then you go home with a knife thing. And it's like this amazing thing. So obviously pandemic hits, restaurants doing takeout only. It's now he can't do his classes. But here he is. He's like, okay, wait, people love the class. What if I prepare the sushi and the rice and make travel bags, and then people come by and pick them up, or I Uber Eat deliver them to their house, and then I'll teach online. Maybe someone will do it. Well, here he is. He has a class normally of 18 people max. Now he's doing 5 nights a week with 200 to 300 people at the same time.
Wow.
You know what I mean? Like, so now he has this whole new business, right? Like, and that's just an idea he had, I mean, at my organization, it was incredible. We launched VX, which is our virtual retail experience. So we have mock showrooms in different warehouses and abandoned buildings now that look like beautiful showrooms, but they're just in the middle of a warehouse in downtown LA, where you on your phone and you're just doing the entire sales process, and I always did that to get people back to work. And now it's like this huge business, but it's all about that pivot, and so I love that you brought that up. And let me ask you this.
Well,
Oh, go for
I
it.
was going to ask, how do you define success though? Because I think that that's one of the reasons I get stuck when someone says failure, success, because again, you can make your biggest failure your greatest success. And I think it's all in how you define the word success, because like, are things easy right now? Like, I hate always like painting the rosy picture that, like, this looks like pretty great and fabulous, but also like now I'm like helping out friends and I'm doing my job and like whatever. I'm just a crazy entrepreneur and I love being in nature, so it works for me. But I definitely hit like a bunch of like very hard moments like through the pandemic, but I think keeping a positive attitude and being open to what success looks like. And I had never taken an investor, but then someone did invest, and if he had invested, like, would we have made it over that particular hump? I don't know. But he really believed and liked what we were doing, and also all the guests that come on and like believe and like what we're doing, and all the viewers we're starting to get. Like, now those things probably will lead to future success, as in more money. But it's like my whole industry is recovering, and like some of them aren't even sailing yet, and like some
Yeah.
hotels aren't even open yet. Like, so it's doing a whole lot more with less, but like being like super positive and like doing the work and like the inspiration and like tuning into positivity versus negativity, and like just trusting that it's gonna like come back. And I know it is, like, it's coming back in dribs and drabs, but like I see the exciting iceberg on the horizon, the one that I'm going to sail around and take pictures of with penguins instead of crash into.
Absolutely. Well, and I think that you're going to catch, especially with the sustainability travel part of it, I think you are going to catch the biggest upswing in history, because, sustainability, organics, how you're doing things, where you're doing them, who you're doing them with, how you're producing your products, like how you travel, all of that couldn't be more on trend than it ever is right now. And then I think you're going to couple that with the entire world being like, I got to get out of my house and travel, And so I think you have those two balances, like it happens to be what I do for a living. So I'm seeing it now already just take off, with sustainable products, but that's going to parlay into a lot of different genres,
Well, can I throw something into the sustainability thing there? Because it is something like I've always cared about. And starting my company 9 years ago, like sustainability was always a focus. And there was a small sector of the travel industry that spoke about it at that time. But now it's a little bit of like greenwashing, and like everybody talks about it, and like what's authentic, what's not. But in a good way. Like, I think because so many people are talking about it, like everybody actually has to do something to show for it. And so to me, I don't ever like to shame people. I like to acknowledge even like the smallest thing, because even if one person doesn't use a plastic straw, like the forced straw industry, like
Yeah.
that actually like does make a difference. And it also has made that person more conscious to like their action. And so as those things start happening on like bigger levels, and like cruise lines start eliminating single-use plastics, and like, you know, I'm at a hotel that's powered by solar panels. And so, like, and wind farming, all these things like start to really like change and make shape. And what I wanted to tie into this was like the entrepreneurial aspect of things, and like just because you've done something once doesn't mean it's done or played out. Like maybe there's an evolution for it. And so I wrote an article called What's Your Sustainable Travel IQ? And it was a quiz. And I did this, I don't know, 4 years ago. And I was asked by a travel conference to come and create a workshop about what's your sustainable travel IQ based on that quiz. And the quiz also used like 5 videos that I had created about everything from like human trafficking to poaching to being a sustainable swimmer slash snorkeler, scuba diver, whatever you want to call it. But I had these 5 individual case studies, 5 videos as a quiz on my website. And then here I'm being flown to Rwanda to give it as a workshop. And then I was flown to another conference, which is the travel journalist conference, and also gave it as a workshop. And then this Earth Day, I was like, I, I don't know. I feel like there's something that we got to do with the quiz. And so we ended up making it into like a quiz video and like publishing it on all our social channels on Earth Day. And so it's just, it keeps taking on all these new and great and different life forms. And I feel like, here's my biggest thing: the things that I regret the most in my personal life and my career are the things that I didn't try. And so this is where I'm like, I don't really believe in the word failure, because the failure is you didn't try to do it. Even if it didn't work, like, or work in the way that you wanted to, there was a lesson there. And so to me, that's a success story.
No, absolutely. I love that. Yeah, I did at one of the, I think, lowest, I would say, points in my life as an adult when I was going through a lot of stuff. I used to, there's a guy, have you heard of Les Miles, the speaker, or Les Brown, sorry, motivational speaker. So I used to listen to him every day when I had this long commute, because he was just so motivated and I was going through a tough time. But he used to always say, if you're going to fall down, fall forward, and, because if you can look up, you can get up, and like just keep rolling. Because I've seen every really successful person in my life, I've seen fail. And the one common denominator is that, to your point, they don't look at it like a failure. They're like, okay, well, that didn't work, but I learned this, this, and this. And now I'm better for it, because the things I've learned, and now I won't do that again. Now I'm going to try this, And so I think it's just so crucial, And so I know I've had you way over the time I said, but I did want to ask you one last question, which is, this second season is really focusing on, having these female executives, and you've, come up in the publishing world, and obviously, and then had your own company, And so I would just say, what do you say to all the young aspiring, females in different industries that are kind of underrepresented when it comes to leadership? What advice would you give them, just having done it yourself?
Thank you for the question. I actually had the honor to ask one of my she heroes, Dr. Jane Goodall, almost the same question during an interview. And I loved her version of the answer. And she was just like, we have to all rise together. And so that if you're a girl, a guy, or whatever you may associate as, to me, it's always about inclusivity and collaboration. The example we were talking about happened to be animal conservation. And so she was like, animal conservation can't happen if the surrounding local community don't have the resources or see the positive impacts of the inbound tourism dollars that are coming in. And so the stool will ultimately fall over if it's not evenly weighted. And so I think for young women, you have more resources than have, and more attention and support into becoming whatever you want to be. And I was very lucky to have parents that were very forward thinking in regards to having, 4 young women. They sent us to an all girls school, and it was all about, our mascot in high school was a marker. And I was like, a what? Like everybody else had an animal or some sort, which made sense because everybody else had them. Then we had a marker, and it was, we leave our mark of excellence everywhere I go. And so I've always been so lucky to have people tell me like, well, if you want to do it, just like my grandparents were massively supportive. And I have to say, to not get discouraged when people say no. And so to, again, Larry David full circle, because I love those story arcs and all of his episodes. But the no, I was a musical theater, dance geek, vocalist. And the reality is it's super competitive. And so I was told no, 95+% of the time. But my mom taught me to start asking why. Why is it now? And, through that asking of why, I started to understand, well, I look like Sandra Dee, but I sound like Rizzo, so maybe I'm just not a good fit for that part. And there's nothing that I can really do about that. Maybe you can do some wigs and stuff, but like there's other things that you can. Maybe you could have worked harder, you could have practiced harder. Like, maybe I fudged the interview, but like I always believe in like that hard, I'm a hard Midwestern working woman. Like we have good work ethic, and that was distilled from both of my parents. And I believe in loyalty and how you treat people. Yes, all of us were told like treat others how you want to be treated. Well, actually, if you really look at that, it seems simple, but it's actually so real. Like whoever makes positive and lasting change because they were like yelled at, they were shamed into doing something, like you want to educate, you want to empower, you want to inspire, like you want to show someone like, hey, think about it in the terms of riding a bicycle. Once you learn how to ride a bicycle, you don't forget. And it's the same for whatever the mode of thinking might be, the positive benefits of meditation, or how to be a more sustainable business, how to bring people through a workplace and a collaborative environment, like how to work remotely, like whatever you're trying to achieve, like arm people with information and like show them the positive benefits of like the collaboration and the working together and the treating people how you want to be treated. And then like people are still going to make mistakes, but it's also how you handle the making of that mistake. And like I had a boss once when I made a very big mistake at Condé Nast call me in and just say, you know, this is hard. We're going to get through this together. But it was really great that you came and told us that you made this mistake. And it's that power of vulnerability, but knowing that you're in a safe space to make mistakes and innovate. And I would actually say Preston from American Airlines did a lot of talking in our Inspiration Station interview about supportiveness of leaders and failure and mistakes that I would highly encourage people to check out.
Nice. We will. And that's actually a perfect segue because we're way over time and you've been so amazing. But just tell us, for people that want to listen to the shows, especially all three of them now, what's the best way that they can find everything that you produce?
Sure. I have a website, Oh the People You Meet, and I am most active on Instagram and my YouTube channel. And those are both Michaela Guzy. And Oh the People You Meet also has a presence on Instagram, OTPYM, where we feature a lot of our contributors and their work as well.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Michaela. This was a blast. I told you like a half an hour to 45 minutes, and that's been like well over an hour. So, but I love the stories and the inspiration. So thank you so much for coming on. Enjoy Tulum. I really appreciate it.
No, thank you, Brett. Really appreciate it. It's been such an honor.
Awesome. Later.